Hello and welcome to Camelot. Today we are going to talk about the Defender class in King Arthur Knight's Tale. I have some defenders here that are going to be our examples. We've got Sir Mordred, Sir Pelias, Sir Percival, and the Red Knight. So in this game, even though some characters may share the same class, they actually can have different skills. Not all of them, but a lot of the skills between different characters that belong to the same class, a lot of the skills will be different, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But first, let's start with something that all defenders have in common. So the defender is essentially your tank in this game. You want your defenders to be at the front, you want your other party members to be behind, and obviously you want the defender to absorb as many hits as possible. You want the enemies to focus on your defenders, and that allows your other party members to attack enemies freely and essentially not die. So defenders wear heavy armor. In this game it's actually called sigils, so you've got sigil for heavy armor here. And heavy armor gives you the most vitality, the most hit points, and the most armor. And it usually also has some defensive abilities, like you can see here. If Sir Mordred is attacked, he reflects 6 damage to melee attackers. He's getting some unbreakable armor, and so on and so on. So that's one thing. Because of heavy armor, you will have a lot of hit points, which allow you to survive longer, to take more hits. And you will have more armor, which essentially reduces damage taken. Let's look at another example here. You can see here that Sir Percival has 103 hit points from this item, and he's getting some extra HP. He's immune to stuns. He gets some extra movement, and he regains vitality at the end of each mission. So, and this one gives 20 armor, which is a lot. So that's the general purpose of the defender class. Now let's look at the weapons. So they can use 100 weapons, again called runes in this game. Normally that means that defender will not deal a lot of damage. However, certain skills that some defenders possess will allow you to actually dish out pretty good amounts of damage. We're going to talk about it in a moment when we look at individual skills. So here you can see that Sir Mordred gets some extra bleeding damage. He regains hit points for each kill. He gains some extra damage against a certain type of enemy, and his bleeding is longer by 1 turn. Lasts 1 turn longer. Other than that, other items that are specific for defenders, like this Oath Stone, as you can see, gives a lot of defensive stats as well, gives 46 vitality, and again you regain some hit points while you're being hit. You reflect damage, and it gives some physical debuff resist and +9 hit points. So the most important stats for defenders are block. You can see incoming damage is reduced by this percentage if the hero is facing towards the attacker. So the block value is pretty high for all of these characters. And then you want your physical and mental debuff resists to be pretty high as well. And you can see what it does is reduces the effectiveness of most physical status effects or magical status effects. And because your defenders will be the ones taking the most hits, all these effects will apply to them. So you don't really want them to stick around, and you want them to shake them off as soon as possible. And these resists allow to do that. I would say these stats are maybe not the most important ones, but it's good to have them pretty high. As you can see, the Red Knight, which is a more offensive defender, which we're gonna talk about in a second. It's got them pretty low, but everybody else is pretty much well equipped when it comes to these two stats, I would say. And then the other important thing for defenders is injury tokens. So when you lose your hit points in this game, you start taking vitality damage. So you lose your hit points first, and then you start losing vitality. And when you're being hit, when your vitality goes down, your hero starts to pick up injuries like this one here. And they are permanent until your hero is treated at the Cathedral, which is one of the buildings you can get in Camelot. So to avoid injuries, you want as many injury tokens as possible. And as you can see here, every token saves the hero from one injury, and they are restored after missions. So if Sir Mordred is being hit and he's got nothing, he's got no hit points, but and he starts losing vitality, then his injury tokens will go down, and when he has 0 injury tokens, he starts picking up those permanent injuries, which are some pretty bad debuffs that can really weaken your hero. And then when your hero is being treated at the Cathedral, they can't participate in missions, so ideally you don't want to pick up injuries. So here you can see that I've got 6 injury tokens on Sir Mordred, 4 on Sir Pelias, and 3 on Sir Percival, and then 4 on the Red Knight. If I look at other classes, you can see that these injury tokens are much lower. Okay, so now let's talk about skills. Now that we know the purpose of the defender, we know what they do, let's talk about skills. So generally, in this game, I would divide defenders into 2 categories. Some of them are more offensive and some of them are more defensive, more tanky, more about protecting your party members. But let's look at the skills that most defenders have in common first. So the first one is Strike. It's a simple attack that deals normal weapon damage, and then you can upgrade it to increase the damage and get some ability points. For example, when Sir Mordred gains 1 AP when killing a unit with Strike, and then 1 AP for the first strike on each enemy in every turn. And you can upgrade it to make it cause bleeding, and bleeding deals some additional damage. And as you can see, most defenders will have that ability, but again, in this game every character is a bit different. So as you can see here, Sir Percival has a different skill here. It's still a basic weapon attack that deals normal weapon damage, but his ability causes burning, and that means the target suffers 30% damage at the start of their turn. But that's the skill you're gonna use the most. It's just a simple attack with low AP cost. It can be effective against certain enemies. It can be very effective because it's cheap. So if you don't need to defend yourself, sometimes you'll be able to use it like 3 times per turn, and that's sometimes enough to kill an enemy. That's pretty good for a defensive class. Okay, the next skill we're gonna look at is Shield Charge. So this is a movement and a CC skill at the same time. So this skill allows you to basically shorten the distance between you and an enemy. So your character charges an enemy, deals some weapon damage, and then knocks the enemy down. And as you can see, a knockdown unit is knocked back and sent to the ground. It will stand at the beginning of their turn with 50% less AP. So that's a very powerful skill because as a melee character, you obviously want to be next to your enemy. So that allows you to shorten the distance. It also adds some CC. And as you can see, the AP cost and the cooldown are very low. So this skill is probably one of the best skills that defenders have at their disposal. So you can see in my example here, all of them have that skill. It's a great skill. Definitely investing in increased range and reduced cooldown are both very good options. The damage is not that important, hence why hence why I didn't invest in that. This is also okay, you know, if you kill a unit with shield charge. So what other skills defenders have in common? So it's usually skills that increase vitality and hit points. So there is a skill called Robust, and it's all over the skills tree. So here you can see there's one here. It gives you 10% vitality and 10% hit points from items, essentially. And there is one here as well, and one here as well. And it's the same for all defenders. So that's a skill you usually want to have just to survive a bit longer if you're really focused down. Here, as you can see, I didn't even bother to take it for the Red Knight. Again, he's more on the offensive side, which we're gonna talk about in a sec. Another skill that defenders have in common is this one here, Shield Block. It increases your block value by 5%. So just to remind you, if your hero is facing the attacker, then they take reduced damage, and the damage is reduced by this value. So this just gives you some extra damage reduction if the enemy is attacking you from the front. But there are some upgrades here. Here you can see this one, Flank Defense, means you can block flanking attacks for 50% of your block efficiency. And then you've got some other skills here that increase the effectiveness of your block or your block value pretty much. The next one is this one here, Recuperate. So this skill gives your hero temporary hit points. It's one of the better skills, one of the best defensive skills for sure. So the AP cost is pretty low, but you can see the cooldown is pretty long, with 4 turns. But you can upgrade it to gain some extra armor and some more hit points, and you can make it last a bit longer. And then you can also get some mental debuff resist. So this skill is absolutely essential, especially on the higher levels. If you don't want to kite your enemies, you probably want to use that as soon as you start running out of hit points, so that you don't take vitality damage and you don't lose those injury tokens. So when you're surrounded by many enemies, that's the time to use that skill, so that you lose temporary hit points and that temporary armor instead of your normal hit points and your normal armor. There are some other passive skills that grant hit points and vitality, as you can see, or other passive skills that either grant mental or physical debuffs, resist, or some passive damage, like this one here, Strength. Increases your damage by 10%. Now let's talk about the two types of defenders here. So, as I said, Sir Mordred and Sir Mordred and the Red Knight are more on the offensive side, and then we've got Sir Percival and Sir Pelias, who are more on the defensive side. So let's start with these two, because they are the classic tanks, really. So the first skill that they have, which is very, very powerful and very important, is this one here, Guard. So this allows you to consume all your remaining ability points. This gives the hero and all allies no further than 2 tiles. They get 3 armor per 2 ability points spent for 1 turn. And then the amount of armor gained is increased by 1 every 10 levels. And in addition to that, your hero will prepare for a single Overwatch attack. So an Overwatch attack is basically an attack that your hero does passively during the enemy turn. So your hero is protecting certain tiles around him, and when an enemy steps on one of the protected tiles, that enemy is attacked with Strike. So this skill is absolutely great, and it's essential for those defensive heroes, because it can really save your tank or your other party members. It's a very powerful skill that can really save a character from picking up really bad injuries or even dying if you use it right. And then you can upgrade it to grant additional armor, to grant some extra AP. You can decrease the cooldown, or you can increase the range by 1 tile. So one of the more powerful skills for sure for defenders. And you can see that both Percival and Pelias have that skill. Okay, the next one is Taunt. It obviously makes enemies around, in this case it's within 4 tiles, enemies will start attacking the character. So it's just a classic tank skill. And then there are some good upgrades here. The AP cost is pretty low, the cooldown is low, so it's a great skill. You can further reduce the AP cost. You can grant some armor when using Taunt. You can reduce the enemy AP at the start of their turn if they're affected by Taunt, and then you can increase the range. Overall, a pretty must-have skill for these two characters and other defenders that have this skill. So now let's look at the more offensive defenders. So we're gonna start with Ser Mordred. So instead of that guard skill, he's got a debuff called Cast Stigma. And as you can see, it's a debuff that causes your the target to suffer increased damage by 20% for 1 turn. You can see the AP cost is very low. The cooldown is also very low, 2 turns, 1 AP. You can upgrade it. All these upgrades are great. The target loses 7 armor. You can reduce the AP cost by 1, so normally it's 2, but with that skill it's only 1 AP. And the range is 8 tiles, so that's great. You can make it last 1 turn longer, and then you can change it so that the debuff, they are vulnerable. It's not 20%, it's 30% with that skill here. So a pretty good debuff, very powerful, cheap, makes the enemy lose a lot of armor. So just that itself is probably worth more than 1 AP, losing 7 armor. So a great skill. Then we have some skills that I didn't take here, but you've got Cleave for Ser Mordred, which is similar to Strike, but it deals a bit more damage, and it can attack 3 units. Obviously the cooldown and the AP the cooldown is longer and the AP cost is higher. And you can upgrade it to cause bleeding. You can upgrade it to deal increased damage in its center. You can upgrade it to just to get 50% more weapon damage. And then you can change it so it causes knockback. I didn't take it for Mordred because I had other characters that dealt damage, so I wanted him to be a bit more tanky, so I didn't really care about it that much. He's got another skill here, it's called Flurry, and it's just like Strike, but you can attack 2 enemies instead of 1. Cooldown is 1 turn, AP cost is 4, also pretty good. And we have Thunderbolt. This is a ranged attack, deals 125% weapon damage. It's pretty expensive, but the good thing about this skill is, again, it's a ranged attack, 8 tiles, that's a lot. Sometimes you'll be out of range with a lot of AP left, so this skill will allow you to do something during turns like that. And then you can increase the damage, you can increase the range, you can reduce the armor of your target, and you can also make it stun the enemy, but that comes at an increased cost. And then another ability, which is great for Ser Mordred, is Chain Lightning. So this is like a series of lightning strikes that targets up to 3 enemies, and they suffer 100% weapon damage. This skill is actually great because, as you can see, the AP cost is pretty low, only 4. Also range of 8 and cooldown of 4 turns. So this one has shorter cooldown, but only one target and costs 1 more AP. So you can see here that Mordred, even in addition to those defensive skills like shield charge, recuperate, and these robust skills that give him extra health and vitality, he's got a lot of offensive skills as well. And then it's pretty much the same for the Red Knight. So he's got Death Strike, which is a very powerful single target attack that deals 170% weapon damage. Not very good if the enemy has armor, because you can see it has minus 20% armor breaking for each point of armor. So essentially you don't want to use it against targets that have armor. He's also got Throwing Axe, which is a ranged attack that deals 125% weapon damage and knocks the target back. He's got Cleave, just like Sir Mordred. He's got Kick, which is another crowd control skill. So this skill causes knockback, pushes the target 1 tile away. Same as Throwing Axe. And he also has this skill. This is actually a defensive skill, because this one is a taunt, but it only works on 1 target. So you can see it's called Mock. Target turns towards the hero and will spend their next turn attacking them. The AP cost is 2, the cooldown is 2 turns. So same as Taunt with these upgrades, So not that good, because Taunt is basically an AoE. This only works on 1 target. You can change it so it works on 2 units, but then it costs 2 more AP, which is pretty bad, 4 AP. Sometimes some enemies are really, really strong and you don't really want them to attack one of the squishy characters, so you can always mock them. And the range is 8, so sometimes you can mock a target and it will start approaching you, but it will be out of range to actually hit you. So that's a good thing to do as well. And that's a great thing about this skill. And then we've got some stuff here like Assassination, weapon damage against units with less than 25% vitality. He gets 25 plus 20% weapon damage. Here you can increase the damage by an additional 10%. Plus 50% against targets affected by bleeding and poison. Increase the threshold by 15%, and so on. So, as you can see, the Red Knight is a mixture of DC and offensive abilities with some defensive abilities like Recuperate and Shield Charge. Same with Sir Mordred. Also, he's got his 2 defensive abilities and then he's got a lot of offensive stuff. And then these 2 are definitely more on the defensive side. But overall, you want them to play the same role pretty much in your party. And that's to cause disruption, to absorb hits, and to make sure that enemies can't reach that enemies find it very hard to reach other party members. Okay, so that was the summary of the Defender class in King Arthur Knight's Tale. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.